First of all, before I start this video off, let me get one thing out of the way. My voice is dying. In fact, actually, it's just recovering from being dead a couple of days ago. So the quality of my voice might jump around a lot in this video. I've actually recorded this audio twice, and believe it or not, this was the better version. Please forgive me, as I also wanted to get this video out today because the first episode came out. Without any further delay, let's get into it. It's finally here. Everyone's favorite character is finally getting his own spin-off anime. Of course, I'm referring to Waver Velvet. Now, Waver is not an unpopular character. At least, he's pretty popular among women that love seeing men love other men. He was the breakout hit in the breakout hit that was Fate Zero. But can he hold the weight of a whole series on his shoulders? Apparently he can, because every time I talk about how far the Fate franchise has drifted from its original premise, this comes up. Every time I mention how I can't stand certain Fate spin-offs, this is the one that people bring up as a hidden gem. So I guess with the first episode of the new anime out, there's no better time than to jump into Lord El-Melloi's The Second's case files. Before we get into the anime, let's talk a little bit about the source material. Although you may not realize it, the entirety of the first case has been translated almost twice. This would be in the form of the first light novel and its manga adaptation that's almost through the first book. And having read both, I can definitely say that it goes in the right direction. The Aedra Castle Separation is a classic whodunit mystery set in the Fate universe. As the book is mainly about mages, you can bet your saber figures that there's a boatload of world building in this book. Of course, being a magic murder mystery, it also has a few unfair twists. This isn't one of those mysteries you can solve from the start. It's one that leaves out critical information until after its reveal. And that's okay. That is a classic staple of the mystery genre. It's nothing new other than the fact that it's set in the Fate universe. So if you like the Fate universe and you're tired of the Holy Grail War being done over and over again, this might be worth your time. The manga is a faithful adaptation, but its translation stops just short of the first volume's resolution. The light novel is translated well enough, but it feels a little stiff and clunky in some areas. If you read Mirror Moon's translation of the original Fate Stay Night, you'll be fine. For anybody that just wants a mystery book, I'd look elsewhere. The draw to this is entirely the Fate setting. Now, shortly before this episode aired, there was an Episode 0 released. And really, there was no better name for this than Episode 0. It's extremely underwhelming, and more like a proof of concept than anything else. The stakes are kept extremely low for an episode with Waver's life on the line. What Episode 0 is more focused on is introductions. And with a familiar character undergoing a huge change in age and name, there's a lot to introduce. Surprisingly though, we're still thrown into the middle of things. Waver is already a lord, and he is already a professor at Hogwarts, the Clock Tower. He already has his apprentice Gray, and his apprentice already has the series' weird magical mascot. What I'm saying is that it throws a lot at us. Not to mention a bunch of named characters of the El-Melloi family that I'm already starting to forget. This episode and the TV series it's connected to actually adapt a later volume in the series. While the Aedra Castle Separation was the first volume, the anime will adapt the fourth and presumably fifth volumes. These are known as the Mystic Eye Collection Train Case, or through some dumb Japanese wordplay, the Rail Zeppelin Case. I know, this is a lot of information to assume the audience will have going into an Episode 0, but it's not too much. And I'd be happier if they got all of these introductions out of the way in this Episode 0 rather than the first episode. What I did like was the character interaction. Despite Lord El-Melloi II being stern and serious, we'll occasionally see little glimpses of the clumsy and goofy Waver. He clearly hasn't forgotten his old friend either. This feels like an actual progression of Waver's character all these years later. He plays off of Gray nicely. I was expecting Gray to play the role of a saber clone to a T. But she isn't a Saber clone, at least not in personality. Her gentle nature contrasts with Waver's low tolerance for his students' bullshit. Speaking of which, the twins also seem like they're going to have some fun moments annoying their professor, and seeing Waver chew flat out in class was pretty good. It's looking like they'll also be used to introduce new kinds of magecraft, so that'll be interesting for world building. I won't talk about the sister or whatever this thing was because they were barely in it. Overall, it's not a bad setup, it's just a shame that it lacks the punch at the very end that a good first episode needs. But I really don't mind that since this is not technically episode 1. In fact, let's see what episode 1 does with its setup completely out of the way. This was a much better introduction to Waver as an adult than episode 0 was. And it makes me wonder how much of episode 0 we're actually going to see reincorporated into the rest of the show. Most of the characters introduced in that episode didn't appear in this one. But honestly, I was way more invested in this. This had that perfect episode 1 punch that makes you want to see what's going to happen next and what they're going to do. And it also sold me on the concept of Waver having his own show and series. To be honest, up until this point, including reading the manga and the light novel, I really wasn't particularly sold on having Waver just have his own show. I really didn't know how interesting you could make it. But I think they're making the right decision by not doing the first book. I don't know at all what the plot to the Mystic Eye collection, train Zeppelin, whatever, Rail Zeppelin case is. But I can say that this first episode already made me more excited to see what comes next. And I also like that it isn't going over the same Fate Stay Night stuff over and over again. I mean, obviously, it's heavily connected to 0, and they're probably going to do a lot more callbacks to 0. That's fine. But I like that we're getting to see a wider look at mages and magic in the Fate world, rather than just hearing about it in the background, especially because most of the time we just end up seeing it in Japan. For both Fate Stay Night and Fate Zero, they take place in Japan. I think that this will broaden that scope a lot more. And if they continue on with something of this quality, I think we're going to get a really good Fate spin-off on our hands. Possibly one of the better Fate spin-offs that we would have gotten, because Apocrypha and Extra are such high bars, I guess. But I'm good. I'm sold on the premise. I like it, and I'm excited to see more. So let's go over what I want to see for the rest of this series. So I'm definitely going to be continuing week to week with this anime. And to be honest, other than maybe that firefighter show, there's nothing else this season that really calls to me. And much like I did with Goblin Slayer, I'll do a wrap-up video when the season ends. But I do want to address a few things that I want from this anime. Number 1, a mystery that the audience can solve. This might be a little bit unfair, as some of my favorite mystery shows have completely unsolvable cases until one key piece of evidence that the audience has never seen before is revealed. I don't want anything completely obvious, but I do want something that makes me go, oh yeah, I should have seen that before. 2, week-to-week mysteries. Now, I don't know if this is going to be a bit unfair, but I don't want this anime to be one big, long case. There's already been mention of some anime original episodes thrown into the mix, and I feel that's where you could do something like this. I'd like to have a few short, single or two-parter episodes in a Detective Conan-style mystery. Maybe something that just adds together into one big climactic arc. And finally, 3, no servants. Now, here's where I am probably asking too much, and debatably, this has already been broken by one certain character. but I want this to distance itself from the standard Holy Grail War setting as a whole. The Fate universe is ironically older than Fate itself. I'm expecting references, I'm expecting callbacks. Just don't make this into another Holy Grail War. Stick to these 3 things, and I think we'll have a good season on our hands. And if it doesn't, who knows, maybe it'll still be great. I guess we'll just have to find out at the end of this summer season. If you want to keep up with me keeping up with the waiver anime, go ahead and subscribe. You know, hit that bell or whatever. I also put out a video on edgy manga last week. And so if you want to see me review some edgy manga series with a much better voice than I have right now, go and check that out. Until then, I'm going to leave before my voice gives out on me completely.